boys, well, welcome back to the show. My name is Ty Hildenbrandt. Dan Rubenstein not with me today. He is visiting family out in California. So in his stead, I've got one of our favorite friends to bring on and chat with here momentarily about all things college football business. Give us a bit of an update, let you know where things stand. Of course, you can always go on out to verballers.com if you want this episode, all of our episodes without the ads, if you want bonus content, access to the Discord, so on and so forth. That is verballers.com. If that is not your thing, I promise it's okay, but please do hit follow or subscribe so that you don't miss any of our episodes, like the wonderful content we are about to present to you today. Matt Brown from Extra Points with Matt Brown joins me now. I was trying to think, Matt, when the last time was that we had you on, but we generally do this like at least once a year where we have a little like round table and talk through where things stand on the business side with college athletics, sir. So it's great to have you back. How are you?
Listen, it's great to be back. I was thinking about that too. It might have been about a year, and I feel like I am maybe the platonic ideal of an off-season podcast guest. You know, not somebody who's necessarily a ball knower, but if you want to talk about the video game, if you want to talk about everything else that's been going on that you really have paying attention to because you've been watching actual football, I'm your guy. I'm happy to be back.
I think the ball knower thing is a bunch of BS personally. I just think it's something that people say to make themselves feel validated. But you know about as much as anybody, certainly with the on-field stuff. But in addition, and I would say far beyond when it comes to the business side of things, which love it or hate it, has obviously become much more of a storyline for us here as college football fans over the last couple of years. Usually when I go into an interview like this, I've got a bunch of bullet points, things that I want to hit, talking points. I've got an agenda that I want to follow. I didn't do that today because you're the one down in the trenches doing all the dirty work, trying to figure out what is going on. I thought maybe we could start there with what is of note to you, what should be of note to our audience with respect to college football, LLC, the business.
I think one of the off-season stories that is most interesting to me is what athletic departments are going to do with the $20-ish million that they're allowed to directly distribute to athletes as part of this House settlement. We commonly refer to this as revenue sharing, although I don't think that's exactly what this is, because schools can share money even if they're not really bringing in any revenue. But if you're opting in, you can have up to 20.5-ish million bucks that you can directly pay. But that has to go to your entire athletic department. You're not going to put the whole thing in football. And even a school like Georgia is saying we're going to allocate some to men's basketball, women's basketball, and everything. And I was thinking about this before this conversation. I think a school like Penn State is actually a pretty fascinating case study for how you distribute this, because obviously football is the most important thing. You're going to have share north of $10 million just to kind of get in the door if you want to be a college football playoff contending caliber program. But you also are now the defending national champions in collegiate wrestling. You have an outstanding men's hockey program. You're competitive in women's volleyball, and you're also, I don't say this to be disrespectful, like that's not really a basketball school. Penn
really?
State people forget this. Penn State men's basketball, not really a thing. Baseball, even less of a thing. Is this an example where maybe you go a little bit more on football, you go the bare minimum you can get away with for basketball to spread things around a little bit? That's going to look different at Tech than compared to Texas Tech, compared to Ohio State. Notre Dame has a lot of different obligations to spread things around. I don't know what the best solution is, or to what extent people can go outside the cap through marketing money. And most schools are pretty reticent to talk about what they're doing in public right now. Big surprise, right? This is the kind of thing you should figure out more from talking to agents, from talking to ADs when you turn off your phone and try to kind of guesstimate where things are going. To me, I think that's very interesting. And there may be some potential ways at the mid-major level to moneyball, not just college football roster building, but I think athletic department roster building in a new way.
Let me take a step back. You're talking about $20 million, you're talking about a House settlement. I know we have referred to that time and again on this show, specifically on these types of episodes that we have done with you. But
Sure.
this is now going to be a thing, as you said, revenue sharing, however you want to describe it. It is very much coming to college football in short order. How did we get here, maybe from where we were when we last had this conversation?
A good question. So let me try to zoom out, because I don't blame anybody for their eyes starting to glaze over a little bit whenever someone says antitrust law. But right. Last couple of years, we had a world where athletes could make money for their NIL. And for those of you that are listening just on Spotify, I'm making air quotes right now with my fingers.
Non-visual medium. Yep. You can watch out on YouTube. You can watch out on YouTube if you're interested in seeing Matt's wonderful hairline.
NIL. Yeah, right. So you could make money as an athlete from a marketing deal. I did a couple of these. The local businesses throughout the country have done a couple of these to pay athletes for doing marketing. And then you could get money from a collective or from a donor group or from somebody else. That would be what we would consider a salary, right? This is your talent acquisition fee or your talent retention fee. And that wasn't meaningfully regulated by the NCAA or anybody else. And so that way you could have a payroll of near $20 million if you're Ohio State football, or 12, 13, 14, 16 for many, many programs last year. Then there was a big lawsuit. Several lawsuits that were consolidated together. House v. NCAA, named after Grant House, who was a swimmer, as their Arizona State, for a bunch of folks that were athletes that didn't take advantage of NIL and wanted to sue for past damages for being held out from economic benefits. And if this had gone to trial, the NCAA probably would have lost $11 billion. Just a hilariously, it's definitely billions with a B, would have bankrupted the entire everything. So to avoid losing everything, the power conferences and the NCAA pushed for a settlement that is likely, but not certain, likely to be approved in the coming weeks, in early to mid-April. And this settlement, which you might see referred to as the House settlement, institutes roster limits. So instead of having 85 scholarships and 120 or so folks on your roster, you now have 105 roster spots, and you can give scholarships to everybody if you want. And it requires schools to pay back damages for people that missed out on their NIL rights before. And then now, more importantly, allows schools to directly pay athletes for the first time. So what you'll hear about would be a school like Ohio State saying, I am going to buy the NIL rights for this linebacker, and I'm going to hypothetically pay this linebacker $250,000 a year. I can use his name, image, and likeness on billboards and radio ads. And if he transfers, the agreement is null and void. And schools now have a little over $20 million to distribute among their whole athletic department. And athletes can still make money outside of that. Not to get too far in the weeds, but you're not supposed to use that money as inducements. It's going to be verified by a third party to make sure no one's getting $100,000 to sign one autograph. Right. How well that can be enforced or legally enforced, who knows? Laws don't matter anymore. We don't really know, but that's the cap number that we're working with. So rather than the money going through, when you and I first started talking on the show, used to go through McDonald's bags, right? It would go through bagmen. Then it would be money laundered through charities and collectives. Now, for the first time, it's going to come directly from Ohio State.
Wow. It's a bit of a paradigm shift, especially that it feels like we have gotten here so quickly. It feels like NIL just got here, and now suddenly we're going to be talking about schools paying players directly, which of course raises a whole bunch of questions, not the least of which is the whole, are they employees, are they not employees conversation, which maybe we can get to later. But yeah, I'm curious, since I know you talked to a bunch of ADs, obviously people considering the financial ramifications of this. What have you seen? What have you heard with respect to the different strategies, the different ways that they're planning to use this money? I mean, you use Penn State as a case study, I guess, and how maybe they could allot funds towards the more important revenue generating sports where they're actually successful. But I would imagine, since this thing is so new, you're going to see a pretty wide spectrum from one school to another with respect to, how they actually plan to use this to their advantage.
I think that's exactly right. And, shifting away a little bit from college football for a second, just for all of athletics, right? You might be a school out in Dan's neck of the woods. You might be like a Cal State Fullerton or a Long Beach or something, or his original neck of the woods, right? where
Sure.
you don't have football and you're in the Big West, and you could theoretically put that money into basketball, but you Irvine and Long Beach don't have $20 million, and they're not going to, even if they put every penny they had into basketball, they're still going to lose to Duke. You can't really compete for national championship that way, but you could in baseball, where those kind of schools host NCAA regionals all the time, and you don't need $20 million to build a competitive roster. So you may see some of those schools say, all right, we only got $4 million to share. Let's make a meaningful bet on volleyball or baseball where we can win a national title and get national recognition that way. You have a couple of schools, say in the Big East or the A10, that don't have scholarship football programs that are going to say, well, we might be able to give more money to basketball because we might have a smaller pool, but we don't have to deal with sharing it with 85 football players. And so our basketball, budget might be larger than some Big Ten or ACC or at least FBS institutions. Kind of moneyball it that way. And then for FBS, right, you're going to have some schools that are gonna go put in as much as they possibly can into football. You're going to have some that are maybe going to do a little bit less because they're confident their athletes can make it up through marketing or licensing or other ways, kind of above that cap. And you're going to have some that are not going to offer very much at all. It's a challenging question, I think, right? If you're a G5 program, where very few of them are going, like, in fact, I don't think anybody's going to go to 20 million, and not very many are going to go meaningfully above like 6 or 7. How much is it worth to throw in your roster? You're probably not going to give any to high schoolers.
Right.
Because they're 2.5 stars. You have no idea if they're going to be good or not. Can you pay them enough to retain them, knowing that if you have an all-conference Mountain West guy, he's going to go to the Big 10 or the Big 12 no matter what? I don't really know how you distribute that money, which is a challenge. And I think one of the most interesting things to me is how schools are figuring out how to distribute that money. Because you have some, like North Carolina, that are bringing in ex-NFL front office people, paying them a lot of money and saying, like, we're going to be a 33rd NFL team. We're going to run our front office that way. But the most common thing for schools, and I know this because I have a bunch of these contracts, is if they have a GM, they're taking just some guy from player personnel, somebody who used to be a scout, and change his job title and give him a slightly better set of software and work at it that way. Because it's not the NFL, right? Salaries aren't public. We don't have anywhere near the same level of performance data that we have for the NFL. And we're dealing with 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. And I think I want to use the industry-specific term for talking about young people at this age. They can be stupid. And so trying to treat this the same way that you would with professional caliber representation and grown men in their early 30s, I don't know how transferable it is. And so we're all just kind of throwing stuff at the wall right now and then giving press interviews to say that, like, actually the school has figured it out and this GM is elite and this guy's worth 900 grand. Brother, nobody knows yet. We'll know in a couple of years.
Well, it's such an interesting, I'd imagine, calculation. If you are a GM and if you've got a designated pool of money, are you using that money, just with respect to football, not talking the entirety of an athletic department, do you use that money to retain guys in the trenches? Do you use that money to retain a certain amount of depth within your roster and then work a little bit harder above and beyond to get outside sponsors, presumably who have more money that they can throw around to keep your stars? Like, I think of a team of like an Ohio State, right? Ohio State kind of went through this exercise a year ago. It worked out for them. They spent a lot on their roster. They were very targeted with how they went out and got people to come in and, retain some of the talent that they had, but they were very, very good at maintaining some amount of depth on that roster going into this past season. And that's a big part of why they won. I think depth right now, especially given we're in the transfer portal and NIL era collectively, it's really hard to keep good players on your roster, especially if they're not guaranteed playing time. I wonder if that's the strategy, or do you just go out there and splash the pot and keep your stars? I don't know. I mean, this is why everyone's hiring a GM now, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if you can do the same strategy in every place, right? I think there's some parts of the country, I don't want to say you could just step outside and grab a wide receiver, but there's places where it's easier to recruit. There's places where there's more talent available, and maybe more talent available that fits certain schematic areas. The Ohio State example, I think, is interesting. There might have been, to me, I think, some misunderstanding or misrepresentation of the way that roster was built last year, right? Because Ohio State did get a couple of important guys in the transfer portal. I don't think the Caleb Downs situation is necessarily one that is scalable. Guys of that caliber generally don't hit the portal very often. If Nick Saban was still there, Caleb is probably still at Alabama. But
Sure.
you can get journeyman quarterbacks. You can occasionally get high level skill position guys. But where Ohio State really spent a ton of money was retaining all of these people that they had developed since high school to keep them from going to the NFL draft as third or fourth rounders. And I think
Right.
has some similarities to how Penn State is looking a little bit, I think, coming into this year. It's early. I don't know if we have great data to suggest that you can build a championship winning roster or championship caliber roster more than 30% in the transfer portal. It may eventually happen somewhere else, but I think to your earlier point, there's generally just not enough guys in the trenches. And the depth is even more important now, not just because you can't stockpile it and because rosters are more transient, but the season's longer. If you want to win a national championship now, you're going to have to play basically an NFL season. You got to win 3-4 games late into the year, which means you probably can't be running 90 snaps against Akron in September. And whether that means teams play differently in September, or they do have to build their rosters differently, or they deliberately play slower to try to preserve people, I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch over the next couple of years.
And of course, I guess the triggermen with respect to allotting who is getting what, roster management, things of that nature, this newfound position in college football known as a GM, we've known about it in every other sport for an eternity. It feels like in the last 6 months, everyone's been talking about GMs in college football. I know you wrote something about this out on Extra Points. You alluded to the fact that it means something different everywhere. In some cases, they change a job title, they give them more money, a better version of Excel, whatever, so that they can do what they got to do. What have you learned with respect to that position and how it's, I guess, maturing around college football?
I think it's interesting because what general manager means in the NBA or the NFL and what it means in college are really very different. And it's not just because there's a bunch of different flavors of GMs in college, but right in the pros, and there's some exceptions, but generally speaking, the GM sits above the coach on an organizational chart, or at least parallel to the coach in an organizational chart. The GM is the guy that is building the roster, negotiating the contracts, doing trades, and generally has some autonomy to make some of those decisions regardless of what the coach wants. There are exceptions, but it's generally at least peers, right? In college, with the exception of Andrew Luck at Stanford, and I think we just saw this played out, a day or two earlier, the GM unquestionably reports to the head coach. The head coach is at the head of the college sports organizational chart. The GM is not empowered to make independent, autonomous personnel decisions. They serve at the luxury of the guy above them, which already makes these very different gigs.
Yeah.
And some schools are already saying, we don't need this, right? Kirby Smart has already went out there and gave an interview last week saying, it doesn't make sense to have one person, do this because I have to be involved in these decisions. And so are other people on my staff. We have a bunch of part GMs. And that's also true in a lot of SEC and Big Ten programs right now. I think the last time I looked, it's not really a common setup in an SEC football at the moment. There are a few exceptions, but so we already can't compare the two things, right? Then you have, I think, a pretty big gap about what kind of experience you're bringing in. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, right? It could be somebody whose expertise is navigating the NFL collective bargaining agreement, finding contract loopholes, figuring out undervalued assets. Your job is to pour through advanced stats, make some graphs, and figure out how to find a linebacker that gives $300,000 worth of value for $175,000. And then you have some people who are not from that world at all. And I don't think that's necessarily bad, because when I look at the pros, NBA, NFL, anything else, if you're a front office person, like I mentioned, the salaries for professional athletes are public. You have a collective bargaining agreement, which means we know when free agency starts. We know how long contracts are. We have some base rules, and we have commonly accepted performance data benchmarks that are shared through everybody. And we don't have any of that in college. So I have no idea, right? If somebody who's awesome at running the Bears salary cap can do the same thing for Georgia Tech. Maybe they can. Maybe they can't. I legitimately don't know. And I think anybody right now that tries to tell you that they do know for sure, that they're certain, I think they're trying to sell you some software.
Okay. Have you figured out how to pierce that veil of secrecy yet? That's kind of your specialty, right?
I'm trying. I probably have 12 or 13 GM contracts in our library right now. And I can get some people to talk to me because we're trading information. I can say like, hey, I have the contract template for revenue sharing that Louisville has sent out. I'll give it to you if you want to tell me a little bit more about what you're doing, player personnel wise right now in New Mexico. And sometimes I get some of those things, but it is hard. And I think this is true for a lot of my peers. Coaches are not always honest. Agents are not. I know.
Is this
new?
Know, right? Is this new?
It might just be me. It might be my face. I don't know. I don't know why. Agents sometimes not always telling the truth. Athletic directors don't always tell the truth. And so there's a lot about this world where I am making calls and listening and doing my best, but these are not stone tablet laws, I think, right now.
You mentioned Louisville, and I think Louisville is actually a really good example for my next question, which is, do schools like this? Do they see this as an opportunity? Do they see this as an impediment? I'd imagine, this is just me giving my opinion, I'd imagine if you are one of the bigger money schools, yes, it's more money you need to, I guess, a lot elsewhere that you're not used to doing, but still that can be an opportunity. Can be an opportunity to, be honest, let's say, in some sense of how you want to retain your players, and be honest with respect to which programs are the most important at your institution. But for a school like Louisville, which is, obviously a big school, but not what we would consider top rung in college football, how does a school like that view this new era where, okay, now we've got to pour some amount of money into a football program? Is the football program as big as the basketball program? This calculus that you referenced earlier seems like it would really come into a play at a school like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And part of it depends on who you talk to. So when I talk to coaches, while many of them are happy that if the school is paying, the school has much more control over the situation. You don't have to rely as much on boosters or on collectives that you can't control or necessarily trust. Almost every successful coach that I've ever met, God bless him, tends to be some kind of control freak. And now being able to, issue those contracts yourself gives you more control. That's generally considered a positive. One thing that I hear a lot of coaches are really frustrated about are the roster limits. For a lot of programs in the upper level of the P4, you're generally not playing walk-ons very much. If you're counting on walk-ons to fill out your 2 deep, you screwed up in a couple of places. But that doesn't mean that coaches don't love having walk-ons and love having rosters of 120, 125. And part of that is because it makes practices better. But I've heard a lot of people tell me it's really important for culture. Because if you have 85 guys that are all 4 stars and are making money and they think they've already got it made, and you're having to practice against somebody from East Bumblefart, Nebraska, who the only thing they've ever wanted to be in their life is a Nebraska Cornhusker,
Right.
and they're just killing themselves every day in practice to maybe be on the travel roster. Coaches love that because it reminds the people that came in with more prestige they still have to work. And every once in a while, some of those people will end up being important on special teams or as backups or as contributors. When you move to a 105 hard cap roster, you're going to have to kick a bunch of walk-ons off the team. You're going to have to cut a lot of people, and you're going to have to do it relatively quickly, which nobody likes. The roster limit system is, I think, universally criticized among football coaches and especially among other coaches. Hockey people hate this. Track people, soccer people hate this. A lot of people will be processed. And that will also mean that there are going to be people that are going to be cut this summer that are good enough to play MAC football. Or good enough to play Mountain West or Sun Belt football that might make their way on rosters.
Right.
So that is kind of a push and pull. The thing that I think frustrates almost everybody is not whether a rule is good or bad. It's instability. And right now there's still a lot of questions that nobody can really answer about how you can spend above the cap. Are collectives authorized to continue to exist? Should they all be moved in-house? We have to report deals of over $600 to Deloitte to see if they pass a fair market value test and have some third party audit them. Is that legal? What happens if I don't do it? Can I promise recruits right now that we can guarantee them X amount of marketing dollars above our cap? Nobody knows. And we're going to find out in a year or two. And some schools are just going to say, screw it. We're just going to do that thing and hope that somebody stops us. And that is the environment that frustrates a lot of coaches and administrators. And that's kind of the way college football has run really for the last 20 years. Give me the rules and I'll plan around them. Don't make me guess what the rules are.
Don't make me guess what the rules are, which is totally fair if you're in a high power position. I totally understand that. I have a few more questions on this, that I do want to move on to some other subjects. Yeah. One of the things that Dan and I talked about, I know it was in the news somewhat recently, was, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'm probably going to botch it. Hopefully you can correct me if I get anything incorrect. But this continued power play from both the Big Ten and the SEC to control certain aspects of the sport. I mean, I think it gets a little bit more with respect to headlines when we talk about automatic bids into the playoff field, but there is also a piece of controlling this money. Not to say that they are getting more money than anybody, but they seemingly have an outsized impact in how that money is regulated, right? They're setting up, is it like an outside commission that is going to keep track of and make sure that the rules are followed? It's basically like a shadow NCAA, as per my limited understanding. What does that look like? How are they actually going to enforce this? Because to your point, like, the rules over the last decade are very wishy-washy. And sometimes they're followed, other times they're not. It doesn't seem like the NCAA wants to really enforce anything because they don't want to get sued again. How does like that symbiotic relationship look from your chair?
Whew, it's a tough question. So to go back to that third party, it was specifically in this legal settlement, this kind of post-house world. The four A4 conferences have hired Deloitte, massive consulting and company, does a lot of account auditing, does a lot of consulting for other projects. Deloitte is running a NIL deal clearinghouse. And what Deloitte is saying, and Deloitte, not from their own free will and volition, but because the major conferences have put together these rules in the settlement, is that every deal that an athlete does that's over $600 has to get audited by this company. And if you do a deal with Dr. Pepper and you're going to be on all the Fansville commercials and you get $1 million for that, great, because you're on TV all the time. If you're the cover athlete of the next video game and you get, $500,000 or something like that, great. That's market rate for being on the cover of a video game. If you get $100,000 to sign a couple autographs at the Boys and Girls Club, no, that's not market rate. That's called someone trying to pay you money to be a left tackle when you're not actually marketable. And what Deloitte is saying is, now we would flag that, and we can do, and we have the power to do those things because this settlement was blessed and certified by a federal judge, and that we will have regulatory power vested in us by this legal system to make changes here. That's what it says on paper, right? And the settlement hasn't been approved yet. There'll be some questions about that. The unsexy answer is nobody knows what happens in June or July, because the second that's approved, there's a small army of trial lawyers that are going to want to sue it on antitrust grounds.
Right.
But it's also possible that Congress certifies this and puts it into law and says, okay, now instead of Deloitte, it's the Federal Trade Commission that's going to regulate some of these things. Congress, now that it's unified Republican control, could say, no, athletes aren't employees, and we're going to try to codify whatever the NCAA said in 1998. That's now law. That is a thing. That is a thing that could happen. Not to be partisan, but we're moving into a world where we don't really know what the law is in some places, or who's going to enforce it, or whether it's the Department of Education or Department of Justice or Civil Rights, and maybe there's a law on the books and they just fire everybody that enforces it, and then so there is no law. Nobody knows. And like literally at this point, and this is what keeps a lot of people, coaches, administrators, business reporters up at night. We don't know.
No. Okay. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. I know a lot of people listening to this podcast do not give a rip about video games. I know this because many of them have told me, but I do think it's a fairly big college football business story that the new football video game came out last July. You probably have better numbers than I do, but from everything I've read, it was an overwhelming success.
Yep.
You've already reported that there are plans well underway to develop another version of the game. I have mentioned it on, I think, some of our bonus episodes anecdotally that I have read chatter online of people who typically would be very deep in the weeds on the Madden front have started switching to play more college football for a variety of reasons, ranging from timing to content within the game to the gameplay itself. Again,
Yeah.
I don't want to get too deep down that hole because I know there are a lot of people out there who don't care. But let me put it to you this way. What has been the reaction that you have picked up from the powers that be, both on the EA Sports side as well as the college football side, to how this video game went over and to what they think it means specifically moving forward to grow the sport?
It is hard to overstate internally what a massive success EA Sports College Football 25 was. It just eviscerated every industry projection, internal company projections. It's kind of a funny thing, right? I remember before the game, and I'd do a lot of YouTube interviews because I did a bunch of reporting on the last game, or I'd go on Reddit, and there would be people that would just say, like, this is going to sell more than Madden. And I would say, that's ridiculous. I would say that because people at EA would say, that's ridiculous. The NFL is overwhelmingly more popular than college football. There's a huge incumbency advantage to this franchise. It has an international audience, and college football doesn't. And then for point of sale, it's sold more than Madden. And I think part of that also speaks to a lot of domestic frustration with the Madden franchise and how this one was new and there was pent up demand, but it went very well. And schools were happy about that because that meant that the royalty check that the schools got was far greater than they thought they were going to be getting. Like, the dirty little secret is that historically schools didn't make very much money from video game licensing. Last year they did. And some of the biggest schools, I believe, made over 7 figures. A lot of schools got a 6-figure check when normally that wasn't the projection, just because it sold so well. And EA is very excited about that. Where I think one of the kind of lesser told stories that I think is really fascinating is also what this growth of this game and success of this game meant for some of these smaller schools. I think you and I might have talked about this before. If not,
we did. I remember that
beforehand, right? But like, Kennesaw State was America's meme team for anybody that ran a dynasty program last year, right? This is the expansion team. You got the goofy mascot. You get Reese Davis saying, "Give a hoot." You're located outside of Atlanta, so it's a little bit easier to recruit and build a pipeline that way. Half of America started when they got this game and played with one play now and figured out how to do it. They fired up a Kennesaw State dynasty, and then people at Kennesaw State were like, "Yeah, our Google search skyrocketed." We had people from all over the country now becoming aware of our school, which is a mostly commuter college, around Atlanta. That's huge for them. And now more schools are looking like, how can we use this game to not just better engage our alumni and our students and our players themselves, but also expand the reach of our program throughout the country. And I think you're going to see more explicit programming built around that for this next year. I will say it's really hard to build a video game. It's very expensive to build a video game. But the commercial success of this project has inspired, I want to use those words very carefully, has inspired both people at the campus level and in the video game industry at large to think more creatively about how to use college sports assets in games, whether that's football, potentially other things.
Interesting.
I can give a quick example on that because
go ahead.
Are confused, right? MLB The Show, the new baseball game for the first time now lets you start your dynasty mode, your career mode as a college baseball player. They don't have all the college baseball teams, but they have I think it's 10. Cal State Fullerton's one. It's like LSU, Texas, a couple other major powers. So those schools got a nominal licensing deal, and you could see some of that IP in the game. Maybe that gets expanded. Is this something that could potentially be a part of a future NBA 2K game on an expanded level than it has been in the past? Historically, you could play limited college basketball games with a small number of teams as an NBA career. Yeah, that's something that could be expanded. I've heard developers and licensing companies talk about that. Could that potentially mean a new college basketball game? Potentially, yes. Like I can say, that is substantially more possible than it was a year ago. Now that we have hard and fast sales data to show there's some interest there. Could it mean licensed mobile games that are way more casual, that use college players and college programs IP in them. Yeah, I think that's also possible. Like a greater sense of possibility is happening in the video game industry now. Once people saw how popular this college football game was.
Do you think those possibilities include fixing their servers, which go down more than they should? Just wondering if anybody out there is listening.
Yeah, right. I know. Text some people at EA.
Right.
I don't know if any game that has this that has this number of people playing on it doesn't have that problem. Whether it's a sports game, whether it's a shooter, I'm sure that improving the multiplayer experience is a big part of what EA is focusing on. Because I will say, like, the game last year in many ways was pretty bare bones. I think feature wise for playing online with other people, it was a pretty limited Ultimate Team mode. Online Dynasty had some significant limitations to it. The road to the college football playoff was probably the most developed online game, but that had some limitations. Like, certainly those are areas that the company's looking at for next year.
Well, sorry to my friends from EA who I know also listen to this, but I just had to ask the server question because that's been frustrating for me. But nonetheless, do you think that the next version of this game is going to sell as well as the first version? Because the first version, I think, tapped into almost like this pent up market demand that, we had waited for a decade to try and get a new game. Ever since the previous one went away, there was obviously a lot of interest in this one when it came about. Now it's kind of, the seal has been broken. Do we think that there will be as much interest?
I don't, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I heard somebody from Xbox say over after the summer that EA Sports College Football 25 sold more consoles than any other game since like Grand Theft Auto, meaning that more people bought a system just for this game. We talked about this before. I think we both know a lot of people in their mid to late 30s, early 40s that just hadn't been playing video games since college that bought a system for this. I don't think you can reactivate that crowd every single year. There's still new consumers out there, especially if and when this game goes to computers, goes to PC, for people that don't have systems, or more importantly, globally, because PlayStations and Xboxes are very expensive in parts of South America and Asia. I think once this game eventually ends up on Steam, whether it's next year or the year after or the year after that, you'll bring in new people. But I would not expect it to sell as great as this year. But if they do 80% of the numbers for next year's release, or I guess this summer's release, than they did last year, I think people will still be thrilled.
This is a perfect point for me to remind everybody that out at verballers.com, we have a bunch of people running Xbox and PS5 dynasties. I'm in the PS5 dynasty. I keep losing every year. I won the championship our first year of doing it, but now everyone else has gotten better. And since then, I have not. So, but if you're interested, verballers.com is where you can go for more information on that. I wanted to round third here and slide into home talking about your exploits with NIL and specifically with sponsoring a bowl game. I don't know if this is something we had a chance to fully unpack. I think we talked about it either on a bonus episode or maybe something down the stretch later in the year. I'm kind of losing track here, but regardless, you sponsored a bowl game. You got a little bit more involved on the NIL front. I'm wondering from your perspective, was that meaningful? What was that process like being an advertiser, in effect, hoping to use this to try and build some brand recognition, some trust in what you're doing, and to kind of be out there as somebody participating in this marketplace? What was that experience like for you?
I honestly, being a part of the Extra Points Bowl was one of the professional highlights of my career. And I'll be honest, like, did we make money from the Extra Points Bowl? Almost certainly not. It wasn't exorbitantly expensive for us to buy the licensing, but did we generate more subscription sales than we paid? I don't think that we did. But that also wasn't the point. One of the things that I've learned from running Extra Points now for the last, I guess we're coming on year 5, which is crazy. But wow. One of the places where I think we've been the most successful about trying to explain how college sports works is by being involved. Right. Part of the reason I think I was able to do a better job covering the development of EA Sports College Football last year was because I've made a computer game And I'm not a great software developer, but I knew enough to ask, I think, maybe different kind of questions while talking to devs or people than maybe somebody who's never coded before. I definitely think I'm better at writing about NIL and the limitations of influencer marketing, having done some of those deals. I can tell you, I think I won't get in trouble for saying this. We've also been trying to get a shoe deal the same way that a small college might get a shoe deal. We've taken meetings with shoe companies in part to better understand how that process works so we can explain it. And we'll write about that more later this summer. But that was part of why we did the bowl game, because I believe that event management and selling sponsorship rights and selling IP and creating new events is going to be a really important way for big and small schools to earn the revenue needed to pay players and to handle their budgets. And so if that's going to be part of my beat, I should understand how it works a little bit. And I can tell you, hey, selling ads at a stadium for a game is hard. It's not something you can do kind of part-time on the side like we did. You know, the next year's Extra Points Bowl, we've hired a dedicated salesperson. We're going to be pounding the pavement much earlier and much harder.
So there is going to be a part 2 to this. There
will be another Extra Points Bowl. I have a meeting with the participating conferences. It should still be the President's Athletic Conference and the Ohio Athletic Conference. It'll still be at the Canton Hall of Fame Stadium in late November. 2 Division III teams. Last year, Westminster beat Marietta for the Extra Points Bowl championship. You got these patches here and the logo and the trophy passed out there. But I'll tell you, like, what was most meaningful was being on the field near the end of that game. I remember talking to a player's dad at Marietta. Pretty good Division III team, missed the playoffs. And dad was saying, hey, my son broke his leg, tore his ACL in the beginning of the season, his senior year. I thought he wasn't going to get a chance to play again, or got injured somehow. Right. And because there was an extra game in the season, he was able to come back in time enough to play this game. He's like, what you've given us is one more bus ride, one more team dinner, and one more chance to compete with his best friends and end his career on a different note than being injured. And he was like crying because he was so happy about that. But at the end of the game, you see a bunch of these guys who had no idea who the hell I was, didn't know Extra Points from Sports Business Journal, from Sports Illustrated or anything. They probably heard of me in the publication for the first time the day before, screaming with joy about holding this trophy and winning, because not because of me or because of this company, but because they wanted to compete one more time, which is what Division III football is kind of about. When you sit there and think, was this worth the few $1,000s we spent on it? Hell yeah, it was. And I wanted that recharge. And so and now I think it's exciting to think about this for next year. Would we like this to help us sell more sponsorships or subscriptions, or maybe our software product to more schools? Yeah, that'd be great. I'm a business. I'm not a charity. I'd love to get more earned media from this. That helps Extra Points. But I also want to help make a good event. You and I both know that people that compete in college football at smaller colleges, they lift just as many weights. They try just as hard. They grind film just like guys at Penn State, Notre Dame, and Oregon do. And you want to be able to spoil them a little bit. And because when you're playing at Oberlin or Kenyon or some small college in front of girlfriends and parents and Mima and Grandpa and 40 other people, it's nice to be able to play at a big old stadium and get a bowl swag bag and get on TV for a little bit and have that special moment. They'll remember that for a long time. They got rings for it and everything. And that's what we want to keep doing. And that's worth the money for us.
What are the wrinkles this year? Have you considered, I don't know. I mean, first off, we need to get you some sort of custom Extra Points Bowl jacket.
You know, I have one, right?
I know you have one. I was looking for it, actually, full disclosure, while we were having this conversation, trying to see what it looked like.
If you want to give me a second, I can go upstairs and put it on so we can have it on the.
All right, go ahead. We can pause this. We can absolutely pause this.
Give me 1 second. I'll go get it.
Yeah. All right. So there it is. It's the blue jacket. The blue jacket. So when I brought up the jacket, I saw the picture of gorgeous blue fabric. I did not see the patch on it. And the reason I bring up the jacket is obviously, that's kind of a thing in college football and sports as a whole. I sat next to a contingent of Fiesta Bowl executives at one of our previous stops and was like transfixed by these jackets that they were all wearing. So I guess my point is You either need to find a way to get more people that stunning blue jacket. Dan's blue jacket we refer to as the blue whale. We can give you that name as well if you want that. But we need more blue jackets and I think more patches this year. I don't know how widespread they were.
So I think there's only like 3 or 4 of these jackets, and I'm going to spill some industry secrets here, because we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get these things. I ordered this, I think, from a costume shop. The blazer was like $60. It is. Let me tell you something. This is machine wash, baby. This is the finest fabric possible.
Like a Halloween spirit store?
It's it was an online one, but not unlike that, because I went to several like actual suit places, and we couldn't get one ugly enough. I mean, I go in there like, I want something that Ron Burgundy would have worn. Here's our company, color scheme. What do you have? And they're like, I'm sorry, we're too Caucasian for this particular kind of suit. You might have to go somewhere else. So we got over this costume store, and then our friends at Home Field Apparel helped design the logo. We made that into patches, and then once I bought the coat, I got this even tailored a little bit for me, and then sewn on. And we got a lot of people have asked, where can I buy one of these? So I'll mention this on the show here, because I would love to sell them, but I need to figure out a way to do that economically and affordably. Because people say like, I want this jacket. I'm like, do you want it $150 worth? Because I think that's almost what it will be for cost and sewing and manually shipping. If there are people out there in the direct to consumer world that are like, I have some ideas, or I mean, I have a huge. We give these patches away for paid Extra Point subscribers. If you want to make your own, I would love to find a way to make these more accessible to people. And it's funny.
So here's the deal. Here is the deal. We have a very large audience for this show. If anybody out there can help Matt in his pursuit of either making more jackets for people to buy or just to give away, because I think that's the secret sauce. If you're going to have a jacket, and if it's going to be a specialized bowl game, I think we need to give more jackets out to the people associated with the bowl game. You are like the mascot for the game. You are the brains behind this operation. You certainly need one, but we need to start branching out and giving more people the blue jacket so that the blue jacket becomes a thing and eventually it can become the trophy.
I would love that. I'm going to wear this to NACDA this year, which is the gigantic like athletic director industry conference. And when you see like P4 athletic directors at this thing, everybody's got the very fancy checkerboard, Gloud jacket and their school colors, and then like whatever Air Jordans or they have for their particular shoe deal. That will be me. And I'll wear this on whatever panel I can get on here. If you're listening, this is not about making money for us. This is about putting something in the hands of what the people want, which is a ridiculous blueberry colored, jacket here for this bowl game. I'd love to help make that happen. The other thing that you need, not to cut you off,
please, if you're going to go to any kind of convention and if you're going to wear your very dapper outfit, you need a briefcase with a handcuff, and inside you need those patches that you can give out.
That is a great idea. I think so. The next convention is in Orlando. It's this summer. I think I will do that, and then I'm looking forward to explaining that to like Joe Castiglione in Oklahoma or something.
Perfect. He would love it, I'm sure.
This is the actual football, right? In terms of other tweaks, what I can tell you, there's a couple of priorities for us for the game, right? We're supposed to have a military flyover actually for the Extra Points Bowl.
Cool.
There was bad weather, and so we didn't end up doing it. That is a goal for this year. The trophy we made, I like, but it was smaller than I thought it was going to be. And now that I think we have some more time, we kind of had to do a rush delivery. I think we'd like to get something bigger. I think the last one was like this big. And when you give that to an offensive lineman, it looks like a microphone. I'm like, okay, this is a big enough game. We want to expand there. But I think that the thing that's most important to us is how can we direct more money and more stuff to the athletes participating. Everybody who was in the game last year got discount home field stuff. They got like defector subscriptions. They got subscriptions to Extra Points. They had a lovely dinner. They got a personal tour of the NFL Hall of Fame, which I think is great. If we're able to bring in other sponsors, like what our goal, we weren't able to do it last year. Maybe we'll do it this year. I wanted to give people EA Sports gift cards, given like how much a part of our coverage that had been. We'd love to get them more food. I thought we might be able to get Wendy's or some Ohio-based like company to help cater this. That didn't happen, but we have next year for that. I think we want to look at everything we can do to put more money or stuff or experiences into the football players, and then after that, we look to the fans and how else can we expand this. And I also tell you, like, I don't know if we're going to do the Extra Points Bowl for 10 years or not, or if we look at maybe doing something more local to Chicago, where I live and am based after that. But we have had some conversations about getting involved with other athletic events, whether that's an Extra Points early season multi-team event in college basketball. I'm particularly interested in maybe getting involved in sponsoring something in college hockey, or potentially sponsoring an award. I would listen. I know I'm never going to get the Heisman Trophy back because I think I've tweeted some anti-Vox media things too many times.
Sure.
If somebody else were to buy it, we'd be happy to sponsor and commercially support it. But maybe something in that end. We have a lot of big ideas of how we can be involved and help athletes this year.
Well, this is really cool. It's really cool. I'm glad that you did it. I'm glad that you have these experiences you can share. Why don't I close out with this, just to bring this thing full circle, especially since we started talking about the House settlement and how that might impact college football. What is the next asteroid headed towards the sport that you maybe don't feel is imminent? Maybe it is. I don't know. I hope not. But something that you are tracking on your Matt Brown radar.
Well, there's two, and they're both centered around the White House. The asteroid number one is the employment question. And the conventional wisdom, I think, among my peers and many political analysts was Congress is not going to do anything to help the NCAA. And that was, it was smart to think that, I think, because we used to have a divided Congress and getting bills passed through Republicans and Democrats was almost impossible anyway. And helping fix the NCAA's labor problems is not an issue that animates a lot of lawmakers. There's not a ton of really big time college sports fans in Capitol Hill. And there aren't really single issue voters out there thinking like the only thing I really care about is the NCAA antitrust exemption. Like that's not how politics works, right?
Right.
But
right.
Now Republicans control everything. And the guy that is going to be most plugged in leading the charge on this issue and who is very, very intellectually engaged in it and really cares is Ted Cruz, senator from Texas. He's going to release a bill in early April that's going to provide a limited antitrust exemption for and define athletes as not employees. And his staff, and I've talked to even some Democratic staffers, are confident that there will be crossover support for this in the Senate. Whether this dies in the House, whether it dies because some other crazy political thing happens, who knows?
Sure.
That's one issue. And the other thing, and I say this I don't want to be partisan but I want to tell the truth, is higher education in this country is not in an especially healthy place. And it wasn't before this new administration. We've talked before about an enrollment cliff or demographic change that's making it much harder for smaller schools, especially in the Midwest and Northeast, who don't have enough students and so are losing money. But when you have a world where enormous amounts of federal funding are cut through medical grant research and scientific grant research, and what I can tell you, and I've heard this from athletic directors, not just university presidents, is there's concern about funding for FAFSA, funding for future GI bills, funding for other, for Pell grants. And if those things are disrupted, we're looking at dozens of schools closing. And then the issue isn't so much about how is like Ohio State going to fill out their football roster. Then it becomes, how does Akron stay open? Let alone, how does Akron have a football team? And those are asteroids to consider here. There are issues that can shape college sports that have way more to do with college than the sports that are potentially at play here over the next couple of years.
All right. A lot going on.
On that happy note.
On that happy note, yeah, a lot going on. Tell the fine folks where they can find you and your work, Matt. You do a great job.
Very quickly, I think I'd say, even though I'm ending on that, I have some optimism about this industry. I think this settlement could be a positive thing for a lot of athletes. In many ways, this is probably the best time to ever be a Division I college athlete, particularly a high-level football or basketball player in terms of what you can get for money. And other benefits. I think there are some changes happening in college sports that are going to be very painful in the short term, but may really be better for consumers and the industry at large afterwards. So I know it might have been a tough hour here. Honest to God, not everything's on the catastrophe beat. And you can read about these things, but what's going on, big school, small school, catastrophe, fun stuff like D3 bowl games. You can find that at Extra Points, extrapointsmb.com. 2 of those are free. 2 of those are behind a paywall, which then funds things like this ridiculous jacket.
I am a paying subscriber. I would encourage everybody to go out there and check out Matt's fine work. You've been killing it, man. I give you props. You've been doing all sorts of creative stuff. I know it's very much been a labor of love. I'm glad to see that you've grown and expanded and have been able to make this full-time thing because you're doing really important work. So thank you again for the work that you do. Thank you again for your time that you're always willing to share with us. You're one of our best friends here. So we love having you on just to have a conversation anytime we can, and promise to do it again soon. All right.
It's my pleasure. Everyone, I promise I'm fun in real life. I promise I'm not just here to be Debbie Downer and everything. I'm always happy to be on. Thanks for having me, man.
Why don't we leave it there, one and all? Again, I'm Ty. Dan will be back on our next episode, back from parts unknown out there in California, visiting family, enjoying the warmer weather. Hope you stay with us. Hit follow, hit subscribe. Again, going out and check out verballers.com if you're interested in the ad-free episodes, bonus content, Discord, playing in the Dynasty, if that's your thing. I don't know, but verballers.com. For myself, Ty, for our guest of honor, Matt, and for Dan Rubenstein, who is very much here in spirit. We'll talk to y'all soon. Stay solid.